Hello, we'll be starting in just one moment. Hi, everybody. Just give me a second. Okay. Hope you're all enjoying the rain outside. Welcome. Okay. Today we'll be discussing a controversial or a question that many people have always had. A question that's, I'm sure, in many people's minds, especially the first time they walk into our Chabad synagogue or into any traditional Orthodox synagogue for that matter. And the question, the long-awaited question, as being that we're going through different customs and traditions in Judaism, this question, of course, is one of them as well, which is that I'm sure any person that walks into a traditional synagogue, what are the things they see? At first, it's something called a mechitza. We'll show you what the one that we have right here, so you can get a visual on that mechitza. A mechitza means a partition where men and women sit separately during services. And the question is, why do traditional synagogues have separate seating for men and women? So we're going to look at this, first of all, from a historic background, where it even came from, and then we'll also look at many different ideas where and why we have them. So number one, historically, where does it come from, the concept of mixed seating, or what we call today family seating? Where does it come from? Mixed seating and family seating, as once it was called, was first introduced into the American churches in the mid-18th century, and it had little to do with gender equality. What was on people's minds at that time was it came to a period in the beginning of the mid to the 18th century. The reason why the patterns began to change because of the overwhelming move to adopt a family seating was because at that time there was a concept which was that there was a certain sociological difference, that the husband was usually out in the field working and the mother did all the domestic things in the house. And therefore, they decided to try to bring the family together. They said that they should pray together, and therefore the line then came, a family that prays together, stays together, to create some type of family community, or some type of way that the family can be together for some type of, not only when they sleep in the same house, but to get together in different occasions, because getting together, whether it was for family dinners, wasn't common, or doing things as a family was very strange. So therefore, if they made something of some type of religious activity, or something that they went every single Sunday as a family together and sat as a family together, that brought some type of family closeness, and that's where it began. An interesting thing is that even in the beginning, the first even Reform temples didn't have mixed seating. There's an interesting story that there was in Germany, where the first Reform movement we know started, the German Reformed Jews rejected mixed seating in the early 20th century. There was a Hamburg temple in Berlin where an American banker, or his name was Henry Badge, offered them $1 million marks for them to make mixed seating in their temple, and they refused. It only came later on when Reformed temples were taking over churches, and they were then too lazy, or they didn't want to invest the money into putting in a mechitza, into making separate seating, so they kept it the way it was until then. This is how it eventually infiltrated and trickled in to Judaism as well. But the synagogue has always occupied an important place in Jewish life, and therefore was a place where a person communicated with his creator. A synagogue is a place of personal reflection, and a place where we as an individual connect with God. It was never a place where it was a time to bring the family together. The synagogue was a place where a person as an individual went and davened to Hashem. As we discussed many times in Judaism, most of the practices of Judaism are actually practiced in the home. One of the major Jewish phenomena is that the Jewish home, not the synagogue, is the place and the focus of Judaism. That's why in the Jewish home you have kosher, you have family purity, you have holy books, mezuzahs, to the extent that a synagogue is not even obligated to have a mezuzah, because it's not a place where you live. It's a place where you come to pray with the God. The concept of a synagogue is that from there it empowers and it gives us the ability to have a Jewish home and to have the ability to practice properly in our Jewish home. In fact, there's a story that we find with the first patriarch Jacob, that Jacob, when he was on his way to go to Lavan to build a Jewish family, and where did he always stay at night? He stayed in a place on Mount Moriah, which was the place of the future temple. And it says it lay down to rest, and he took stones all around him to protect him, and those stones all became one. And then when he woke up in the morning, he made that stone a place of prayer, and eventually that stone became the foundation, the cornerstone of the holy temple that was built many years later by King Solomon, which was the concept that what did our patriarch Jacob say? That this synagogue that we make is the cornerstone, that from there we have the impetus to make our home holy. So technically our home is the holy place. How does it become holy? Because we're in the synagogue that makes it holy. But what's the epitome? Where's the place that Judaism is most practiced? Is in the home. Where is the place that the family gets together and stays together, so to speak, is when a family at home practices Judaism together and does Judaism as one. That's where that's where we have the holiness, and that's where the family unit as coming together of serving God. And therefore, where are most Jewish rituals and practices done? In the home, not in the synagogue. The synagogue is that energizer that gives us the ability to do it at home. Where did it all of a sudden become? And if you can look at this, where did all of a sudden become the practice that mixed seating or family seating began, the concept of families praying together, was in places where Judaism was not as much practiced at the home. For example, it started off at the churches where they don't have any much rituals at home. Most of their religion is practiced in the church, so therefore they started family seating. Same idea that it infiltrated into Reformed congregations, where most of the people attending the Reformed congregations had any or little practice of Judaism in their homes. Their only place where they practiced Judaism was when they came to the synagogue. So therefore, they wanted a family seating in the synagogue because there was no Jewish practice at home. And then again became then into the conservative and the more secular backgrounds of people not practicing Judaism at home, felt that the only place they practiced Judaism was in the synagogue, and therefore they wanted to be with the family. But the concept from a Jewish perspective is Judaism is primarily practiced at home. The synagogue is a place where we, together with God, converse and unite, which takes us a step further. If you look in many synagogues, there's a big proclamation on the place where the chazan stands, and it says, "Da lifnei miyata omed," know before whom you stand. Hasidism explains and says as follows: the word "da," which means to know, means two interpretations. Number one, the word know that whatever you do in this world has an effect in the world above. But also, there's another meaning to the word "da." In fact, in the book of Genesis, it says that when Adam and Eve had their intimate relation, the Adam Yodas Chavan, Adam got to know Eve. What does it mean he knew Eve? He knew her in an intimate way. When they were procreating to be able to give birth to Cain and Abel. The same idea is also when we come into a synagogue. Know that when you are in a synagogue, what are you doing? You're experiencing a level of an intimate relationship with you and God, and only with you and God. It is not a time for family matters. It's not a time for frivolity. It's not a time for exploring everything else that's there. So if you were to stand in front of a king, if you had a request that you wanted to thank the king for whatever you had got, or you wanted to request the king for whatever you got, would you go with your family, cuddling your wife while you're sitting in the synagogue and holding your child's hand, or whatever it may be? Would you go yourself and stand in absolute meditation and connection and whatever it may be to ask God for what you need, or ask that king for what you need? That's exactly what the synagogue is. We are coming to God to ask God for what we need, or to thank God for what we got, and to energize ourselves so when we can come home, we can practice and do even better. This is the concept of why there's a mechitza. So the concept of partition was not that we are separating ourselves from our family, God forbid. It is to the individual to have that notion and understand and recognize what they're doing and to connect to God on the highest level without being disturbed by any sidetracks. For that reason, in a synagogue, there are many other laws pertaining to synagogue. For example, you'll never see mirrors in the synagogue. They won't have pictures on the wall of people in a synagogue. There won't be, the windows have to be placed above eye level technically, so people shouldn't be distracted by looking outside. Any artwork was usually placed in the ceiling, not on the actual eye level. Again, many different things that we didn't do in the synagogue was because that people should not be distracted by what's going around and totally focus on what's going on. So the mechitza, for practical purposes, is that the mechitza is not there to separate men and women, but it's actually to separate both of them and connect them to God. For that same reason, for example, one is not supposed to kiss their child in a synagogue. Why not? Is because you shouldn't show extra love. It's not that you're not allowed to kiss your child. Doesn't mean if you're not going to kiss your child, you're denigrating your child. On the contrary, you're not allowed to kiss your child because it shows you're distracting for what you're there for in the synagogue. The same thing, the synagogue is not meant to be a social time. It's not a time for frivolity. It's not a time for discuss all the other things. Just because people do it doesn't make it right. The synagogue is a place that we have to focus on what God gave us for. The synagogue that we should be able to focus our prayers and speak to God on a one-to-one basis and not be distracted by anything on the side. That's one point. A second point is, again, from a historic moment. The synagogue is a copy of the Holy Temple. And in the Holy Temple, there was an Ezras Noshim. There was a place for a women's gallery above. And then on the bottom was the place for the Jewish people, for the men to stand on the bottom. And because our synagogues model the temple, just like, so we know what it means, prayer, the concept of prayer comes from the Holy Temple. And just like in the time of the Holy Temple, prayer meant connecting to God on a one-to-one basis, not as a family unit, but each individual, which then carried over the family unit when they came home, because that's where the family celebrates Judaism, in the home. And this temple, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, energized and gave the person the ability that their home should be a holy place. And there too, there was the women's gallery above and the men's gallery on the bottom. So too, our synagogues are modeled on that we have men and women separate. And therefore, in the temples that were built, the synagogues that were built exactly for a synagogue all along, they have nice, beautiful galleries with the women on top of them and on bottom. And today that we use the synagogue for a multi-purpose room, we have a mechitza down the middle where the men and women are just separate, seated at the time. Yes, at times it looks like because men are doing, so to speak, the object, as we're going to discuss, why are the men do the different items during the prayer and women don't? That's a separate discussion and we'll get to in a class on its own. But now we're talking about the actual concept of why there's a separation. The separation is for each one to have their focus. Prayer is an intimate act of bonding with God, and thus to pray properly to the highest level, we need to have mental focus. And it's amongst the other restrictions that we have to minimize our distractions and to aid our concentration onto God, is that men should be sitting separately from women. And because the Jewish focus, the Jewish home, not the synagogue, has always been the focus and the nerve center of Judaism, therefore it's not necessarily a need for family values and practice to be in the synagogue. It's only a place to fortify those family values and practices. And once we have those fortification, it is when we come home and that we practice it and we bring it into fruition and we make it happen. And that's why the Jewish home is the most important part of the Jewish life, where all Jewish practices should be observed and practiced. And when we are strong in the home, then we can come to the synagogue individually, pray to God, ask and thank God for everything we need and do. Thank you for tuning in today to Lunch Break with the Rabbi. We'll see you again tomorrow, 1 p.m.